For the entrepreneurs and the businesses that are wondering where and how to start, it's our hope that you look no further than this event right here today to begin to answer some of those questions. And I'm really honored to be able to kick that process off by inviting two distinguished panelists to join me here. So we'll have a conversation about advancing with Africa as an export and investment destination. I'm going to introduce our panelists and invite them to take seats, and we'll get the conversation underway. First, I'd like to invite my colleague, Claire Young, who is the Global Relationship Director at Absa Group, to join us. I'm going to have you sit at the furthest seat, Claire. Absa Group is an Advance with Africa national champion. Claire is based at Absa Bank's New York representative office, where she works at the U.S. headquarters, working with clients who are operating in or looking to enter Africa. So that's all of you. I hope all of you will get a chance to meet her after this conversation. And not only is she based in New York, but she spent significant time in Absa's offices in Johannesburg. So she will be a great resource for us today. I'd also like to invite Dr. Vernon Darko to join us here in the center seat. Dr. Darko is the founder and CEO of EQUIPXP, which is a global industry leader in the sale, finance, and transport of capital equipment to frontier markets. I'm sure he's no stranger to all of you in Houston, given the many hats that he wears, including having served on the Greater Houston Partnership's World Trade and Africa Committees, and as well as on behalf of the nation as part of the Sub-Saharan Africa Committee for the Export-Import Bank. So I'm really thrilled to be able to kick off this conversation, and I will join them on the panel, but I want to extend an invitation to all of you in the room and online. We're going to break the ice in this conversation, but the truth of the expertise that is gained and the knowledge that is shared is when you all join in the conversation. So there will be Q&A. We look forward to hearing from you. Those of you online are able to submit questions as well. And we're looking forward to having you help us enrich this conversation. Good afternoon, colleagues. Let's try this. Good afternoon. Is that on? Excellent. Well, let's get underway. We're really thrilled. Thank you for validating that. I like an audience that's not shy. So let's get underway with the panel. You've heard a lot of really exciting things about what Houston has to offer and the connections that Houston has made with the continent in terms of doing business and growing the partnership in a variety of sectors. But as we kick off this panel, part of why we're here for Advance with Africa is really to talk about why now is an important time to engage with the African continent, given your leadership and your roles. I'm going to start with you, Claire, on the end and work our way in and out. But would you tell us why you think now is a time for business leaders to engage with the African continent? And why should companies look to make a market pivot or an entrance into doing business in Africa?
Thanks so much, Kendra, and great to be down here in Houston. I was telling Kendra the last time I was in Houston, it was for a Tough Mudder, so I was electrocuted and muddy when I left, so hopefully this will be a better experience for me today. So I think two real questions. So why Africa and why now? And very distinct answers there. Why Africa? I think it's such a clear answer. So you look at some of the stats that have been referred to loosely today. So 60% of the world's arable land, fast-growing youth population, digital adoption. There's so many reasons to enter the continent. You look at the natural resources, for example. You can't come to Houston, I suppose, and not talk about the offshore gas reserves, for example, that have been found in Mozambique and Tanzania. You look at things like diamonds and cobalt, and the countries of Botswana and South Africa and DRC rather are absolutely critical there. I think the reasons to enter the African continent have always been there, and it's just we haven't been entering the continent really. If you look at the key trading partners for the continent, you look at Europe, you look at China, they've never been questioning; they've always been there. So the real question is, why haven't we been there yet? Which comes to the next point then. So why now? I think a bunch of us gathered in DC at the end of December, and we're there for the Africa Leader Summit. And I think when you look at the work that the U.S. government's been doing to enter the African continent to show that there is true, real support there, and the Biden administration pulling that event together was absolutely fantastic to get everybody into a room together and bring the real business and the political leaders of the continent, of the U.S. together. I think the political will is really there now to support. And then, if you look at things like the Prosper Africa initiative that was started, I think that the toolkits that are available to us when they're utilized, and within the Absa group, we have relationships with a number of those different agencies and are able to use those toolkits to help support the entry. I think now is really just a fantastic time, and a lot of that is because of the will of the U.S. government to help support the entry. Maybe I'll pause there.
I think you laid out some good first thoughts. Dr. Darko, I want to invite you in to provide your perspective as well.
Right now, from my perspective, the continent has always been open. The continent has always been there. There's always been opportunities on the continent. We have had opportunity to visit and work in several countries in Africa, 37 to be exact. And why now? I'm glad there's a why now. I'm glad there's a lot of buzz around it because there's a lot of opportunities in Africa that a lot of us have not taken advantage of. And there are a lot of tools and resources provided by the U.S. Government that we can utilize to enter or access these markets for both positive, for both U.S. and Africa to both benefit from. So right now, I am glad to see the buzz, and I am glad to see what the future holds for Africa and trade.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, you obviously didn't start in 37 markets on the continent, though you have quite a reach, and it's most impressive. I'm curious if you would tell us and tell this audience how you got your start. How did you first get started start working in African markets? I know frontier markets is a very broad representation, but how did you first get started working on the continent? And would you share, how does a company sort of make that assessment? How do they decide whether they're not just ready to go global, but to look to the opportunities that you all have outlined on the continent?
So how we got started is we had, right out of college, I had a group of companies needed some products, which was just computers. So we figured how to sell them computers and ship it to them. And from then I thought, okay, this is something that we can expand on. And throughout the course of that, we've grown into commodities, and the commodity market was very tough because of maybe Africans only imported commodities based on, I would say, if there's was based on their resources of commodities in the country. In other words, they grew their own product. If there's any case where they're not able to grow it, then they'll supplement. And so we were in that commodity space. We decided to move from there to the heavy equipment space because that's the space where Africans do not manufacture these equipment. So we thought, okay, that will be a good area to help because that's infrastructure need there that if we get into the commodity space or the heavy equipment, earth-moving space, that would impact the continent in a positive way. So we got into that space. Now, I would say it wasn't easy. The easiest way to access the market is using the U.S. Commercial services products. One that we used that was effective for us was the Go Key, is whereby they help you assess the customers and due diligence so we can actually enter or see the customers that we can work with. That was very positive for us. The second was we did a market access where we went in with the also U.S. commercial services, which allow us to introduce us to companies that we were able to then transact with them. So those two programs was very helpful. And also we did some trade missions with the U.S. commercial services again to meet, invite, different events that they had going on, which allow us to meet customers, then allow it to finally at least make some sales or make some transactions with these companies. So those three things was very impactful.
Thank you for sharing that. Certainly one of the things that we're very keen to do is highlight some of those tools and offerings that the U.S. government makes available. So hearing that you participated in the Gold Key, the market access, and took trade missions were very critical for your business. If I might, I'd like to turn to sort of the the public sector tools, if I may, or sorry, from public to private, and bring Claire into the conversation. So you heard from Dr. Darko, he's in 37 markets. One of the things when you think about where to start or how to get started on the continent, there are unique markets with different banking systems and legal frameworks. And not only do they vary amongst the continent, they vary from some of our practices here in the United States or some of those frameworks. Can you tell us a little bit about how Absa as a bank looks at some of those factors or risks that should be considered when importing or exporting from a market? How do you look at supporting companies sort of thinking through those things from the private sector lens?
Yeah, great question, Kendra. Thank you. I think there are so many different considerations. So, when we as Absa were opening our U.S. offices in 2018, for example, we had very many of the same questions that we had to answer. So, for example, we knew the offices would be in New York, but how many days of the year could someone spend in Houston before they created a tax problem? And same thing when you enter at any of the different African markets. So every single country has their own regulatory regime. So you have to think about things like exchange control. Does that exist? If you want to take money out of the market, are you able to get money out of the market? If you want to, for example, if you want to have a regional hub, are there regional airports there? Getting to Kenya is very, very easy as a hub. If you want to get into some of the other countries, slightly less easy, depending if there's regional hubs available for you. I think one of the easiest things to do, in my opinion, is probably to find a really strong partner. I think one of the things that we found is that if you come to somebody sitting in the U.S., for example, and you ask a question about, whether it's a corporate banking question, a retail question, we could probably direct you to the right person within the broader group. If you have a question about a tax issue that might be having, we may have a client in that space we could refer you to. So I think one of the key things is just to find a partner who can redirect you. I often refer to ourselves as Lego pieces because we just find the right pieces to refer you on to. And I think that's one of the key pieces of advice I would give is just to find a partner who has other partners they can refer you on to. You ask about the private lens, but I think one of the biggest benefits that we have as an institution is our ability to use public sector tools as well. For example, just targeting the small to medium business space, there's a lot of work, and apologies to my colleague at Exim here, but I'm going to refer to DFC a number of times, very likely. We have a number of programs that we run with USDFC, one of the Prosper Africa agencies that helps support small and medium-sized enterprises across the African continent. For example, in Mozambique, we just signed an agri-focus guarantee for small and medium enterprises. There are entities that we would love to lend to, but realistically, based on the risk profile, we wouldn't be able to lend to them. But if we have a guarantee from the U.S. government, we can. So I think one of the things to consider as well is if a private institution can't lend to you, do they have public sector tools available that they could potentially leverage within that institution? And if the person says no, then maybe there's someone else within that institution who might have a different base of knowledge. So I'd say also don't let no be the final answer because someone else may have a different answer.
Thank you for that. Certainly you can never let no be the final answer. But could you tell just our audience what DFC stands for?
Apologies, I shouldn't assume. So it's the U.S. International Development Institution. So it's the U.S. government's DFI. So people may know them formerly as OPIC. So effectively, a couple of years back, the government restructured to pull together pieces of OPIC and USAID's Development Credit Authority to create a new entity that would act as the U.S. government's DFI. So it's one of the entities that we have a very strong relationship, and we do all sorts of different programming with them.
Thank you. I want to stay in the financing space with you, Claire, again for just a moment. You sort of talked about how you all work with public sector institutions to sort of address some issues, maybe where you all don't have the reach, the expertise, or the risk profile. Can you talk a little about some of the specific solutions that the bank offers to support importers and exporters, maybe from a financing perspective to mitigate risk? You talked about you leveraging the International Development Finance Corporation, but what are some of the things that the bank brings to bear to do so as well?
Yeah, happy to. So I think maybe for anyone who's not familiar with Absa Group, so we're a Pan-African financial services institution. We're across 10 different countries across the African continent. We also have offices in both London and New York. We're a universal bank across the markets in which we operate, and we span everything from retail and business banking all the way up to corporate and investment banking. So within that, obviously depending on the type of institution that's coming in or type of client that we're working with, we would put the client into a specific type of area that would best suit their needs. for a U.S. company that's entering into the African continent, it would really depend on size, to be honest, as to where in the bank that entity would go. And then depending on the profile of that particular client, it would depend on whether we would need to, for example, use other tools that we have available, or if we could lend directly. But we shouldn't assume. I shouldn't assume that necessarily that we're looking for lending here. So if there's cash management needs, for example, then we have all the platforms available. If there's foreign exchange that's required, that's obviously something that we support with every single day, whether it's directly in the country or directly from somebody's home office desk sitting in the U.S. somewhere. So we have all of the different tools available anywhere across the spectrum, from cash management to foreign exchange, all the way up to the investment banking type activities for an entity that was maybe looking to make an acquisition or something of that nature.
That, and those are important considerations. I think we often think about the financing gap, but managing the cash management, being able to navigate the different foreign exchange requirements is also an important consideration. So thank you for bringing that out in particular. Dr. Darko, I'd like to turn to you if I may. I'm really seized with how impressive it is that you're operating in 37 markets. And in my comments, I talked about the African Continental Free Trade Area and the agreement that has been put into place and has been operating now for 2 years. So for a company like yours that is operating in a variety of markets, I'm wondering if you have a perspective on the AFCFTA, and maybe if you can share with us if you're looking at sort of the reduction in barriers that that's going to bring and how it might help a business like yours to be able to navigate between the markets that you're operating in. How do you think this might maybe impact the landscape or the possibility of entering and trading across the continent?
I think it's positive in terms of what we will do. I think it will bring flow in and out of Africa or within Africa very easily. In saying that, also, there are still a lot of tools that the U.S. offers as a business that's located here that can actually fit in all those markets. We just mentioned finance. I will touch a little bit on the finance side in terms of U.S. companies trying to enter these markets. On the finance, we were lucky when we first received an LC, letters of credit, that is, from an African country. We went to our bank, and at that time we were too small. The bank would not be able to give us working capital to execute that transaction. And the bank had referred us to Exim Bank. So since then, we've used all the products that you can possibly use to export into Africa. Medium-term transactions, short-term transactions, and even insurance program to insure our products and be able to protect our payments. So with these tools, as a company, a U.S. company trying to enter the markets, moving freely within the markets, will easily be able to export products from here. And if you set up shop in Africa, you also be able to kind of travel back and forth and be able to transact much easier, I think, if the flow that's happened.
Thank you for that. May I stay with you for just a moment? Okay. Because you alluded to that you started with African partners and you were referred to Exim. We have the benefit of having a number of the members of the African Diplomatic Corps here. Can you talk to us a little bit about how governments have received you when you've gone to the continent and looked at expanding your operations or the markets that you cover? How have you worked with African governments or the investment promotion agencies or the trade agencies on the continent to expand your work as well?
I think in majority of the African countries, they are open for international companies to come in and do business, because I think what it does is it helps generate more business within, which in turn helps the economy for them. So they are open for foreign companies to come in and transact business. So I have not had any challenges with governments in terms of turning or pushing away businesses, our business, or others that I know of.
Thank you for that. We certainly want to underscore the message that Africa is open for business and all the countries on the continent are welcoming. So thank you for sharing that and making sure that we understand some of those different investment attraction tools that are available as well. So I have one final question that I'm going to ask our panelists, and then we'll turn to all of you in the room and those that are online to ask your questions as well. But sort of as a closing question from me, that is. We really appreciated and benefited from the perspectives that you all have shared and the services that you've talked about. We also understand that a key part of what we're trying to do with intentionality is reach some of those businesses, both within the communities of color and the diaspora communities that maybe are just getting started or just starting to think about doing business. But I'm wondering if there's anything that you would share that you think is important that we keep in mind in terms of making sure that we are being inclusive and creating a seat at the table for businesses of the African diaspora, businesses of the minority U.S. business community to make space available for them to be part of this growth story. Yeah. Why don't we start with Claire? So we started with you last time, Dr. Darko. Trying to be even here.
Sounds good. I think I'm fortunate just to have a different vantage point in answering that question. I'm married into the diaspora community, so I can literally see it, at home. And I think one of the most important things to me, and maybe everyone will have different perspective, but actually going to the continent, actually spending some time there, visiting, just spending time in the different markets, trying to understand where you want to enter. I think maybe that's a really, really good place to start, because I think, actually being on the ground and seeing and feeling the different communities and understanding actually what the pulse of, the different countries is like, the different cities, where opportunity actually sits. I think actually spending some time is a really good place to start. I appreciate, not everyone can just hop on a plane and do that. So I would say the second suggestion I would have maybe is just to find a partner, whether it's at a law firm, at a bank, at any large, institution that might be able to just chat with you about ways to enter. I can speak for ourselves. I think anyone sitting in the Absa U.S. office, we're all sitting and we're covering the African continent because we're really passionate about it. We really love the African continent. All of us have spent time there, have lived there. Some of my colleagues are from the African continent. And I think we wouldn't do this job if we didn't really feel that there was an opportunity. We'd go back to, boring global banks otherwise. And I think just take a card, just get on the phone with any of us and just see if there's ideas that we have, troubleshoots, places we can direct you. Equally, and again, I'll refer everyone to the Prosper Africa umbrella. I think there's so many people that are passionate within that broader group as well. I think just having informal conversations maybe about good places to start. I think that's maybe the best place. If you can't physically go to the continent, I think that's the best place to maybe have a start of the thinking.
Yeah. Dr. Darko?
I totally agree with her. If you don't go, you don't know. So that's one of the first things I would say. It's best to actually even do the trade missions. It's much easier, much softer approach in getting there. And of course, I would also encourage people to get involved in such events such as this, or different institutions do different events, like the Exim Bank hosts a conference. A lot of these organizations host conferences. It's good to get around those conferences and see. Sometimes you have Africans traveling here, and being in some of these conferences is a good way to find people, to make connections, and then hopefully be able to execute on your goal or dreams.
Thank you for that. I think that there's some real nuggets of wisdom that you've shared with this audience today, and we're grateful for that. I'll take a moderator's privilege as you all warm up to ask your questions, just to note that the other aspect of our Advance with Africa program is, beyond going and traveling across the United States, is to take trade missions to the continent. And you heard, I think Chris mentioned that the mayor's office will be organizing with Greater Houston Partnership a delegation to the continent later this year. And so we highly encourage that beyond these sessions like this one today, that you look for opportunities to go and join those trade missions, to find your partners here and begin those conversations, but also to be able to travel and begin to do sort of the on-the-ground assessment.